What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Crypto Catch Up. Now today I'm going to do a back to basics lesson. So this is going to be for those new people out there who might just be joining my channel or who have just jumped into the blockchain cryptocurrency scene due to the hype and corridor conversations that might be being had, and to learn a little bit about what's going on in that of blockchains, what they are, distributed ledgers, smart contracts, where they've come from, what they do, and also initial coin offerings or ICOs. Now this presentation could take 30 minutes for me to get through. It's actually a slide deck that I've done at a conference before that I've now just changed the date on, essentially wanting to give it back to the people as another piece of educational content. So let's not waste any more time and let's get into it. Alright, so a quick disclaimer, this material is my personal opinion only, and it's not that of anybody else, my employer or otherwise. This does not constitute financial or legal advice, because we will talk about initial coin offerings, which are some form of crowd raising or fundraising. Now, when people come along and they join this space, and if you are new to this space, what they find is obviously you see a lot of people just wanting to make money. They essentially believe that if you turn up, you throw a couple of $100 out of your wallet, you put it into Bitcoin, and then bam, off you go, you are going to be rich. The reality is, as the 18th of August 2018, if you've looked at the markets over the last 2 weeks, that is not the case. If you bought 2 weeks ago and you weathered that storm, you would be down well below what you paid for the money. And of course, if you don't sell, you still hold that value, but you need to wait until it obviously comes back up. And these things happen exactly like that. They're peaks and troughs, and it comes and it goes. But what I really want people to understand is that technical analysis is great if you're wanting to understand markets and you're wanting to understand trading and you don't really care about the underlying asset. I would argue otherwise, in that because of this highly volatile market, if you don't have some understanding of why certain things are going particular ways, for example, the market might tank because of regulation news that has come out. It might go down because of, some hack or some form of security breach. It's good to also understand what the implications are of that to that particular currency, to that particular project, to the team, or otherwise, or what you're investing in. So you then can trade the market with that technical analysis and know when to buy and know when to sell. But obviously a lot of people only want to make money, and that's fine. But if you are wanting to understand what's going on here and actually be able to have, a decent conversation and partake in this environment, this is why we're doing what we're doing on the right-hand side. And it's not so much understanding Bitcoin, it's understanding even lower concepts than that. So what's the genesis of the blockchain? Because everyone goes around, well, what's cryptocurrency? Crypto is blockchain. Bitcoin is blockchain. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not. Bitcoin is a meta technology. It is something that's made up of multitude of technologies. So it's made up of game theory. It's made up of a blockchain, which is a database. It's made up of some form of incentivization within that game theory, and a range of other factors like consensus, which some of those elements we won't go through today, but we will get down to one of the main principles of what makes up a cryptocurrency or blockchains as a whole. So the genesis of the blockchain came around in the year 2008. So 2008 saw something which was quite catastrophic in the world of the global financial crisis. And with the global financial crisis came, somewhat an eerie feeling in the world whereby these trusted third parties, or TPPs, we no longer could trust. These banks had gone out and overspent, over-leveraged themselves to the point where they simply did not have the funds coming back in to recover and recoup the costs. Now, that's obviously not all of what happened. That is just an example of what has happened with that global financial crisis. But in the very same year, around September, a white paper, an 8-page white paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, was released to the world by a pseudonymous identity called Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, it's kind of a very, clever time, one might say, that this white paper came out, because that white paper essentially described a peer-to-peer currency that removed intermediaries like the banks that we no longer trusted because of this global financial crisis. Then came along Jan 9th, 2009, the very first block of the blockchain was mined. Now that very first block is called the Genesis block, which is where we're getting into the genesis of the blockchain. But we need to kind of use an example to make it easy for everyone to understand what is a blockchain, what does it really mean for yourself and I out there in the world. Well, let's take a very simple scenario. Let's imagine Alice and Bob are sitting on that park bench that we just had a look at, and they're going to trade an apple. So Alice originally has that apple, and Bob wants that apple, and they're going to do some form of trade. They might pay a fee for that apple, $1 for the apple. It could be your favorite Royal Gala apple. Alice hands that apple to Bob. Bob then knows that he owns that apple. And if we look at that transaction that took place, it's very easy to understand. Alice had one apple, now she has none. Bob had no apples, and now he has one. He knows that he owns that apple because he has that apple in his hand. He can see that the apple is real. He knows because it's a physical item that no one else owns this particular apple. It's a non-fungible asset. It's essentially unique apple. But what about if we wanted to trade apples in a digital space and trade digital apples? And if we think about that for a second, this is where it gets complex. Because if you could imagine Alice, she could have uploaded that apple to a website and it's been downloaded 1,000,000 times. So how does Bob know that he is getting the right apple? Alice could have given it to her friends, 5 of them if she had them. And once again, Bob wouldn't know whether he is getting the right apple. So how do we start to track this? And this is what's known as the double spend problem. Because if you were to imagine an ATM that you have today and you had $50 in your account and you had you and a friend both with the same, savings FPOS card, and you put it in and at the very same time you hit enter to withdraw $50 each. The ATM simply will not allow you to withdraw $100. You only had the 50 in your account. And it does this via time stamping, so it knows exactly at this point in time this has happened. But it's also a central authority, so it knows that there is no one else it needs to trust other than itself to work out what is going on at any point in time. So, how do we go about solving this problem? Well, what about if we were to introduce a ledger, like an accounting book? And so what we write in is obviously Alice trades to Bob, 1 apple, Bob trades to Ben, Ben to David, David to Sue, Sue to Karen, Karen to, Bill, and so on and so forth. And so we keep a balance of transactions of what's going on. We know the balance at any one time of individual people. So what about if we give this ledger to, somebody out there, Dave, to look after? So when Alice trades to Bob, Dave writes it down. Well, the problem or the issue or the circumstance that I've just described there is that of a central third party. So if we can imagine Dave is actually a bank, that's what they do for us now. There's a problem with that. Dave could be Bob's best mate. And so after the trade has happened between Alice and Bob, Alice might trade 1 apple, but Dave might see that Alice actually has 5 apples. And after that has gone through, scrubs out the numbers, changes it to 5, and is actually, stolen 4 extra apples from Alice later on down the track. Obviously, we don't want this to happen. So how can we solve this problem? Well, what about if we were to distribute that exact same copy of the transactions on that ledger to everybody that's wanting to participate in the network? So instead of just one bank or one Dave holding the ledger that could be fudged, we give it to everybody. So if Alice was to transact those apples to Bob, the whole network would know what happened at any one time. It would be time-stamped. It would say Alice to Bob, one apple, 10 o'clock at night. So then if one person, let's say this guy down the bottom, let's say it was a bad actor or a malicious actor in the network who wanted to try and rip us off. That's Dave. That's a central bank down there. Dave then tries to fudge their numbers. But what happens is, unless 51% at least of this particular network agrees on the fact that that is the case and that Alice actually did send 5 and not 1, that will never change. It will stay as 1 has been sent, and that bad actor will pay a price. What we've just described here is known as a distributed ledger, or DLT, distributed ledger technology. And it's one of the backbones that make up what then becomes a blockchain. So, what's a blockchain's definition then? Well, a blockchain is cryptographically secure. So it's secure by the fact that each one of these transactions gets secured by some form of mathematical function known as a cryptographic hash. And a cryptographic hash has certain properties, and one of those is the fact that it's deterministic. So if you could imagine I say ABC and I put a hash around that and I hash that, which is like a wax stamp on an envelope, the outcome of that will be some gobbledygook, some hexadecimal numbers, so letters and numbers. But for the same input, will always render the same output. So if I say ABC and the output might be, let's say 1, 2, 3. If I go ABD, the output will no longer be 1, 2, 3. So even though it's a very small change in the initial information, which can be a digital asset, could be an apple, could be a house, could be a Bitcoin. If we hash that, the outcome should always be the same. And that's how we know if somebody's trying to mess with my apples. So let's move on. So it's a distributed database. So we've just seen that the actual distributed ledger, all it's doing is storing data of these transactions. And that transaction, like I've just said, could be apples, it could be houses, it could be Bitcoins, it could be monetary value. It can be anything that you can imagine it to be. And that's these whole digital assets that we're starting to come into in the world. And it maintains a continuously growing list of records. These records can only be appended to by a majority consensus of participants in the blockchain, which is what we described with that bad actor of Dave. So unless 51% or more in the Bitcoin network anyway agrees on something actually occurring, nothing will occur. So Dave is his 1 percentile or 10 percentile or 20 percentile. If he tries to fudge the numbers, it simply will not happen. There are other consensus algorithms out there. So something like Stellar, or what is known as the PBFT, so a Byzantine fault tolerant algorithm, only needs 33%. And there's talks now from something coming from Ethereum with Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder essentially, saying that he has found a way that 99% of nodes would actually need to agree on the change by using an observer of those transactions. But we won't go into those details. So the blockchain consists of transactions and blocks. A block is simply a database of a particular size, or a ledger of a certain number of transactions. And a block represents a number of transactions that have occurred and have been verified to be true. And how they're verified to be true is when we distribute it around the world to everybody who's maintaining a copy of this distributed ledger, the software that they run on their computers, which they don't have to do anything with, the computer will do it for you, has rules built into the software that says, yes, this transaction's okay, no, this one doesn't look right. That is how it verifies it without going into the technical details. Blocks in the chain are cryptographically linked, which we'll go into in a second, to the previous block, creating a verifiable trail leading to the current state of the system. So if we have a look at that, like I said, the very first one there is the Genesis block, this one here, and we take the hash. So this, in this circumstance, this could have 1,000 transactions in the block, and we hash it and we get an output of 1Z8F. And what we do then is on this next block, in the header of that block, we put 1Z8F, like it says down in the previous hash. And then we hash this block. And that hash from the previous block is included in that block. And what this does is essentially if anyone down the track tries to go and fudge the numbers of what's come before it, we will know with a verifiable trail that somebody's tried to do so. So even if they were successful in carrying out what's known as a 51% attack, or better known as the Byzantine generals problem, we would actually see that transaction either way, and then hopefully be able to do something about that later on down the track. That is how the blocks are linked. Now in Satoshi's white paper, there was no actual naming convention that said blockchain. It talked about a chain of blocks, and hence we get this blockchain because they are cryptographically linked to each other for security purposes, to make sure we have consensus with our digital apples around the world as they're being traded, because a block is only a limited size. And the reason for that is because they come around every 10 minutes on Bitcoin, and they come around at different timeframes on different networks, 30 seconds, I believe, on Ethereum. And this is designed to be able to allow certain things to happen on the network. So if we go through this again, it's very simple here. You and I, Alice and Bob, transact on the network. And when we do that, we say we want to do something, right? So I send you 5 Bitcoin. I then tell the world, I say, hey, I'm giving you 5 Bitcoin. Let's tell everybody in the network. And then what happens is that they validate that I have 5 Bitcoin to even give you, and that you are a legitimate person and you've got an account and it's, the real deal. Once verified and everyone's happy with that, it will get picked up, put into a block. That block then gets linked to obviously the chain of blocks, what's known as the longest chain, and we have completed our process. Now that's a very high level overview, but it gives you an understanding of what the network is really doing. So if we move on, just check what the next one is here. Beautiful. So what is really this blockchain that we're talking about? Well, essentially it's a database. So, if you could imagine an Excel sheet or an Access database from Microsoft or an SQL database. So if you've ever storing data anywhere, it's exactly the same, but it has rules around it that allows it to be global. It allows it to be peer-to-peer. So just like Kazaa and sharing of music, and many other BitTorrent and sharing of files, it's exactly like those peer-to-peer networks, but because it's now had these kind of game theory and rules built in, it allows it to be self-sufficient and not have to have a company run it, because there is no head to the Bitcoin snake. Satoshi Nakamoto is not known by anybody in the world, and just to be clear, Craig Wright from Australia is not Satoshi Nakamoto. So distributed ledgers are immutable. So what we mean by that is that they can't be changed. So like I said, if you were to try and change a block in the past, if you try to do that and you were successful, which would be extremely hard to do on the Bitcoin network, near impossible some may add, there would always be a verifiable trail. You can't actually delete the trail of events like a bank can do. They can send $10 million and pretend like, the money never existed. That is impossible on the Bitcoin network. It's secure through cryptography, and it's the latest cryptography. So people need not worry about how secure it is. It is more secure than your banking system. Guaranteed. It's a peer-to-peer network, and it uses decentralized consensus. So you and I participate in the network, and we have to agree on the facts. We have to verify the facts. There's things called smart contracts, which we'll go into shortly. And there's these, elements called digital assets or crypto economics, because we're starting to tokenize assets. We're starting to tokenize housing. We're starting to tokenize anything, essentially grains. We're starting to tokenize a lot of things in these public blockchain networks. And something to keep in mind is blockchains aren't just Bitcoin, and we're going to go into that. They're not just public networks. They can also be private networks that can be used by enterprises in a business to business or B2B scenario. So what's the value drivers behind possibly using a blockchain solution? Well, there's some form of operational efficiency because like we talked about earlier, it's peer-to-peer. Now, peer-to-peer could be business to business, business to consumer, consumer to consumer, P2P, but you're removing intermediaries along the way. And because you're removing those intermediaries, you're obviously creating some form of efficiencies. You're lowering your costs, you're making it faster. You then have your risk reduction because you're removing intermediaries once again. It's cryptographically secure. It's transparent, as we can see down the bottom there, because you can validate every transaction on the network of what has happened. There's some form of transaction efficiency, so it's very cheap to run, cheaper for merchants to use as a currency. So merchants get charged 50 cents for your coffee possibly from the bank. Well, you could run Travel by Bit, a local company here in Australia, which is a merchant point of sale system that runs on a tablet or a phone. It doesn't matter. And as long as you've got an internet connection, you can take cryptocurrency. It's a good solution. New revenue and capital efficiency and inclusion and cooperation. So you're getting cooperation from the network, but you're also including people that are unbanked, de-risked, people in third world countries that might not have the same kind of, niceties in the world like we are subject to in first world countries. So what's the evolution of the blockchain? Well, essentially it started with Bitcoin. Now, there was a lot of digital or cryptocurrencies that came before it. They just weren't successful because they didn't have that consensus algorithm. They didn't have, the brains of proof of work. They didn't have this game theory component built in. We then moved into cryptographic assets, which is still very strong, and also then into smart contracts, which we're now about to go through. And crypto assets and smart contracts is one of those things that they're tied in together, and you can use smart contracts on a range of platforms, but they're, once again, if we think about the value drivers, are trying to bring that operational efficiency. So what's a smart contract and where did it come from? Well, one of the original cypherpunks, Nick Szabo, first coined the term in 1994 in a white paper, or a research paper I should say, that he actually wrote. And at the time he actually wrote it so much so that, he envisioned essentially that he wanted to write contract in code, in a legal contract that is, that it would be so expensive to break that contract from a consumer perspective that they just simply wouldn't want to do it. Now, that under Australian law is illegal, and there's a case between the High Court and Pacquiao, which goes through this. Essentially, one of the banks in Australia, had designed a contract with Pacquiao to the point where it was actually too expensive for him to actually fight that. And because of that, he won that case, which is similar to what Szabo came up with. And Szabo was well ahead of his time because back in 94, there was no technological advancements, there was no technology full stop that would allow you to create some form of global, contract execution until 2015 when the Ethereum project came to life in that of the Ethereum virtual machine, which is essentially a global computer. It allows you to run, arbitrary amounts of code that execute some form of contract. Now, when we talk about smart contracts, essentially what they are is that, if this happens, do this. It's very simple. At its simplest, level, is that it's some form of computation that says, if my car is blue, then, paint it black. Terrible example, but that's essentially what we're talking about here. It's computer code that can be run and execute a contract without written agreements, without third parties like lawyers or anything like that to be involved. And it runs autonomously. With that though, that it's something to be aware of is that smart contracts are known as a Humpty Dumptyism or a misnomer. Their name doesn't match what they are. They're not smart at the point in time, and they're not contractual in many countries. And the reason for that is that the smart portion of it is that they only know what they know in the state right now. So if you tell them to do something, they will do that. But unlike human beings who have some form of conscience, who, if they see a traffic accident occur and they can see a building falling, we might have coded that if a traffic accident occurs, do this. But what about the building that's now about to fall down? How does that play a part in the legal agreement or in the computational code that's been written? So they're not to the point where they understand that kind of level of thinking that human beings are able to obviously express in a court of law. We then move down to oracles. Now, oracles are giving them a little bit more of the smart element. And what I mean by that is that they allow the blockchain essentially to have this smart contract running along and executing when data is, found to be true. But oracles allow, this kind of gateway to the real world. And it's what's really known as an application programming interface, or an API in many ways, where it allows something here to query something here. So this could be something that becomes big with the Internet of Things, with sensor data, with light data, with temperature data, with anything that's coming from a separate device will be able to be queried as a part of this process, which then will give the contract some smarts. So if the temperature is this, before, if we typed, if the temperature is 37 degrees, do this. Well, how the hell is a computer going to know what the temperature is if it can't query the meteorology or the bureau in that area? Because you want this to be a global platform that runs and allows anybody to use it, not just one person and not just a particular degree in a particular area. And this is where I come into the fact that they're not contractual. Now, this applies to Australian law. I'm not too sure in terms of other, countries across the world. But essentially, in Australia, there's 5 elements to a contract: offer, acceptance, intention to create legal relationships, consideration, and capacity. So consideration essentially means that, if you offer me something, I might go to you, hey, listen, I like that, but let's change this. That's some form of consideration. And then capacity, you have to be a legal entity to be able to form an offer and acceptance. The problem with that is that this guy right here essentially is not legal entity in Australia. So software code and robots aren't considered legal entities and therefore cannot do offer and acceptance. They cannot form that, that legal relationship. So what that means for the smart contracts, if you are actually writing them to not just execute arbitrary functions, but are writing them to actually, perform some form of legal arrangement that, you are wanting to obviously be executed when something occurs, make sure you follow it up with a written agreement at the point in time in Australia. Otherwise, you might come unstuck. So then we move on to initial coin offerings. Now, initial coin offerings, are very similar to what people might know as initial public offerings. So when a company goes public, a big business goes public. And essentially it's crowdfunding. It's a way to raise money. Now, it's the original concept. Projects like Bitcoin didn't do an ICO. They literally, are not pre-mined. So every 10 minutes, more Bitcoin is created through the mining process. Whereas other companies now are using tokens to practically distribute out, and you can buy a portion of those tokens, and essentially it gives the project money to go back and build what they want. The downside with that is that obviously a lot of these projects are raising huge amounts of money. A lot of these projects don't have a minimum viable product or an MVP. And a lot of them are scams. So it's said to be 80% of ICOs just simply are either scams, where they're just trying to take your money and run with it, or in 18 to 24 months, not even, they simply won't be around anymore, because a lot of the projects are just trying to raise the money and create a product which is decentralized. But if anybody's ever run a business before, how are you going to make money? So if it's not built into what's known as the token economics or the token structure of what you're trying to sell, that, you know, this decentralized entity or this business is going to recoup some funds through, you know, trading fees, through sale of particular assets, who knows? Essentially, these businesses won't last. There's got to be some form of you know, ability or game theory behind it to let the business run like Bitcoin, which doesn't have a head, it doesn't have an entity, but it has this decentralized community that are offering up their time to build on that, and obviously they get their money through different streams. There is regulation around ICOs, so if you are from China or otherwise, essentially you're not allowed to partake as a part of ICOs, or if you're a business trying to start an ICO, you should never sell to people in China at the point in time because it's not allowed. One way people are getting around this is known as airdrops. So essentially airdrops is, instead of selling it to the public, they're giving it out for free. So if there's a project that's aligned to what they may be building, they might go, anyone that owns this, because you can query, it's fully transparent. You can query anybody that has, you know, an address with this particular token in it, and you can just give them out. So you, once again, via software, will throw those out to the people or airdrop it. And they essentially then get those tokens for free. What then happens is, once the token goes onto an exchange for the very first time, whatever the trading price settles at the end of the day, essentially that's what the company is valued at. And what, as part of that token economics, is they then will, as a development team, as a business, might have, you know, 30%, 40% of the tokens for themselves, and the rest of them were airdropped. So you can imagine if you had 1 million tokens, and at the end of first day trading, you know, the token was worth $1. Essentially, you've now, you know, valued your company at $1 million, which is great, of course, and you own $300,000 of those if you have that 30% kind of share. And here's just a quick video for you that are new to the space. So what you'll see up the top left-hand side is the funds raised. And now this started back in 2014 to obviously the end of 2017, or near end of 2017, where there was a massive jump in investment in ICOs, which you're about to see. And down the left-hand side, obviously, you've got the currency. Now, I will shout out, I did get this Definity shirt for $7.50, bargain, when they were doing a promo the other day. It's pretty funky. I just said that because we've got to wait for this video to kick in, really. So we've got Ethereum on the screen. They raised $19 million. Obviously, they're the second largest cryptocurrency in the world right now. And I'm about to click my fingers, and it's about to go hammer and tong because of the investment that was coming out of, you know, the countries in the world, the people that actually thought they were buying an asset, like a, you know, a share in a company, when really you're not. Because these aren't securities. These are tokens. And so it's going crazy here, and bang, 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 bang. Look at this. Lots of money. It's very blurry. I apologize for that. And there it goes. So if we have a look at the initial coin offerings here, if you look over to the left, so this is from guys called ICO Analytics. They're quite cool. 2018. So $13 billion has been raised this year alone up until July. 537 ICOs, 6 months still to go kind of thing. And we're still, you know, we're nearly eclipsing what was the year before. And on average, they're earning $25 million a pop. $25 million for what, might I add? But if we have a look at the 15 biggest ICOs, look at this. $4.1 billion for EOS, Telegram there, 1.7. Now I might add, for a lot of these projects, they were done via venture capitalist funds, private investments. If you go forward down, Huobi or Huobi or however you want to pronounce it, they are actually an exchange now in Australia as well, which is pretty cool. Now, the magic. It's said by Andreas Antonopoulos, who, if you aren't aware of, you need to go and watch him speak. He's absolutely an incredible guy, and I look forward to seeing him in Australia next year, 2019, for Block Conscious, conference. But it's said that if you go to Silicon Valley and you go into your hotel room and you turn off the lights and you look in the mirror and you say, blockchain, 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 then venture capitalists will jump out of the cupboard and literally just throw money at you. And if you have a look back at what we just saw, that is true. Because look at how much money these projects are raising. It's absolutely absurd. But we won't go into what I think about them. Because really, this is what we're getting. We're getting this, the white paper. It tells us these beautiful things. And you, individuals like yourself and individuals like me kind of go through them and go, wow, this sounds really good. This sounds like a really good project. Oh, 5 cents a token. How cheap's that? And we buy up. And then we get to production if we're lucky. And then by the time it actually comes to fruition, you get this, crappy project on the right-hand side that has absolutely no value, that doesn't deliver what it promised in terms of transactions per second, in terms of decentralization, security, usability, integration, interoperability, all of the freaking features that we needed. That's why you need to be safe out there, guys, with these projects. They literally are not giving you what you want. And this is the 5 stages of understanding blockchain and what we've been talking about. So the first one in the new, which you might have started off at the start of this presentation, is blockchain is Bitcoin. Well, no. Bitcoin uses a blockchain. So a blockchain is just a database. It's just storing transactions. Bitcoin has a lot of other things going on. Blockchain is not crypto. Crypto is blockchain. So that's good, because blockchain is not crypto. No, but crypto, once again, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the other ones out there that we could go on, Litecoin, NEM, all of that, utilize blockchains. Then we go, blockchain has many use cases. We should use it wherever possible. And number 3, I hate, because that is not true. There is so many use cases. There is more use cases that should not use a blockchain than there are that should. And that is the reality. Blockchains are expensive and they're slow. And so for the time being, please do not just put your project on there if you think it's worthwhile. And please, if you're investing, really think about it. Understand the fundamentals. A blockchain can do this, on average, the best ones we're seeing does a couple of thousand transactions a second. Visa does 56,000 transactions a second. Cassandra database does, 2 million plus. Bitcoin does 8. Is it worthwhile putting my product on there? Maybe not. Are you removing intermediaries? Maybe not. Do you need a blockchain? No. So please, be realistic with what you're doing. Blockchain can change the world. I'm going to agree with that. There are a lot of elements such as unbanked and de-risked. It will definitely change their world. And obviously the expert, you go, well, we maybe don't need that for this. And like I said, guys, blockchains aren't just public. There is not just Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a currency. You have other projects like Storage or Seacoin or Ethereum, essentially, that allows you to do a lot more than just transact value. It allows you to do computationally extensive programs. It allows you to store files using interplanetary file system or IPFS. There's more to it, but to do it. So what are some common use cases? And we won't go through all of this because I'm probably going on for forever now. But full provenance and tracking, so supply chain. So if you remove an intermediary as a part of the ports all over the world, supply chains are perfect for this. So when it hits a particular port and you might know that you need to generate a legal document or, proof that the roses that you're sending overseas for your girlfriend, boyfriend, or otherwise are genuine, organic roses. You can generate that at that point in time automatically, autonomously, by using sensor data. So they can be scanned in via NFC, RFID. The system then goes, got to make a contract for the Mexican government. Bam, done, finished. Self-sovereign identity, that's huge. So UPort, having a digital identity you can take with you anywhere. There are some complexities around that, but it is something that's going to be big. Decentralized file storage, like we just talked about, IPFS, Storage, SIA. There's a bunch of them out there. Tokenized asset trading, yeah, we're seeing heaps of that. Digitally scarce creative rights, we're seeing a lot of music and stuff around the IP
your lyrics, your this, your that. Disintermediated financial services, so loans. I am the Australian ambassador for ETHLEND, so that's something that I'm quite passionate about. And then more and more and more tokenized commodities, so energy, that's quite big at the moment. And this is kind of where we're at. So up the top, we have the rat and the little Ninja Turtles, and credits to whoever made this this picture. And you have Monero, you have Litecoin, you have Ethereum, you have Dash. And as we're growing up, we're starting to realize, obviously, the power of these other currencies, what they can do. So Bitcoin's become a store of value. Bitcoin Cash has become more of a transactional currency, more of that peer-to-peer cash system. Litecoin, very similar. Monero, private transactions, same with Dash. And Ethereum is obviously offering this global computational computer, which is highly inefficient. But it's a first-generation platform, and we will move on from that. Well, of course, there's not going to be any questions because this is not a conference. Please ask me a question. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, kidding. Now, you can contact me on any of the channels below, guys. So LinkedIn, if you are a professional, please don't add me on LinkedIn if you're not a professional. If you're not looking for advisory, if you're not, I don't know, don't just go adding people willy-nilly on LinkedIn. It's really annoying. Of course, this video link on YouTube, Telegram if you really need to chat, Twitter, and I do write on Medium sometimes around smart contracts or otherwise. That is all, guys. Please like and subscribe this video. I'll chuck up the thing. I think I've put it up. If it's up, happy days. Oh no, Word's taking it. Who cares? You enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you soon.